Welcome to Loyola Marymount University. I'm Fernando Guerra, professor and director of the Center for the Study of Los Angeles. Today, we have the pleasure of having Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa. He served as mayor for 8 years, 2 terms, previously served as Speaker of the Assembly, and all kinds of other positions that he had that we're going to talk about. It's been 2.5 years since he's left office, and we're going to kind of catch up in terms of what he's been doing, what got him to the mayor's position, and what his future plans are. So let me ask you, number one, welcome you. Thank you for coming to Loyola Marymount University. This is not the first time you've been here. We actually bestowed an honorary degree on you while you were mayor. You spent a lot of time here. We had some debates when you were running for mayor were held here at LMU, sponsored by the Center for the Study of Los Angeles. Before I get actually into your public life, I want to go back. And you were born and raised on the East Side. Is there a moment or a time when you remember thinking about broader Los Angeles beyond your neighborhood and what that city meant and what the idea of Los Angeles started to make an impact in your mind?
I can't tell you that I actually thought about public service, or at least elected office, as a young man or a young boy. I oftentimes talk about, and I did in my inauguration, I had a paper route in the hills of City Terrace, which is roughly 5 miles from City Hall. And I remember, walking up the hill, because you couldn't ride up the hill with the papers. It was just too steep of a hill. And looking at downtown and City Hall, I remember that. And it always captured my
Well, at that
my
point,
attention, not
City
my
Hall was the
imagination.
largest, tallest building,
right.
so it stuck out.
So it captured my attention, but not my imagination, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I can't tell you that I thought about something bigger than me or my neighborhood until maybe I was 15 years old, and I started working with the farm worker boycott. I tell people I've never worked in the fields. I certainly didn't speak a lick of Spanish, but I felt an obligation to stand up for people who were putting food on our table and to fight for them. And it's probably when I first began to think about something beyond the neighborhood, if you will.
You didn't speak Spanish. Is that because Spanish wasn't spoken in the household?
Yeah, I grew up, my grandpa came from Mexico 100 years ago, 1903. From León, Guanajuato. My mother spoke both English and Spanish fluently, and I grew up in the 1950s when, if you were from Greece or Italy or Mexico, you didn't speak the language because it was, despite what you see on Happy Days, it was not necessarily a tolerant time. Mm-hmm. So we only spoke English in the household. And
Yeah, but I've seen you give speeches totally in Spanish and even lectures in Mexican universities totally in Spanish. So when did you pick up the language?
over time, as I said, I worked the farm worker boycott. I defended and worked with immigrants and immigrant workers, and then I got elected in an area where there was a large Spanish-speaking population. So over time, I had to learn a little Spanish, and now I can say a few words.
Yeah. So fast forward, you did graduate from high school, right?
Barely.
Yeah.
I was kicked out of high school at 16. I led the walkouts and got in fights.
And you kept walking?
And I kept on walking, and they walked me right out. And then I went to public high school, Roosevelt. That was Cathedral High School. And I went to Roosevelt High School in Boyle Heights. And
Cathedral now claims you as one of its alums, right?
Well,
Even though they kicked you out.
They do. I have an honorary degree from Cathedral. And I went to Roosevelt High School, where I dropped out for a while, and then went to night school, graduated on time with a 1.4 grade point average, and went to East LA College for a year, and then to UCLA on an affirmative action program, and law school after that.
Affirmative action. Defender, proponent of it, Proposition 209 that prohibits most affirmative action?
I've always said somebody took a chance on me. I grew up in a poor neighborhood, single mom, grew up in a home of domestic violence and alcoholism. As I just said, I was a kicked out of one school, dropped out of another. Graduated with a 1.4 grade point average. Did get a 3.6.
I thought you couldn't graduate unless you had a 2.0.
1.4. They remind me of that. And then I went to East LA College and I got a 3.6 or so and 40 units, 40 some odd units in a year, and went to UCLA. And I tell people, look, some people will say I came in through the back door, but one thing's for sure, I got out the front. And the only person to have graduated from UCLA to be both Speaker of the California State Assembly and Mayor. And the lesson I learned from that is that sometimes we have to give people second chances and give them a shot. And so, yes, I have supported affirmative action. Now, what I've said is we should have mended it, not ended it. I think I was a candidate for it growing up the way I did. My son wouldn't be, in my mind. He had, his father was a powerful elected official. His mother had a master's in education, a teacher, grew up middle class. A different situation for him. So yeah, I do believe in giving second chances and opportunities, and particularly where our schools aren't working in urban areas in the way that they should. There are a lot of talented people in those schools that haven't had an AP class, that didn't get to take an SAT preparation course, that didn't have calculus and advanced math in high school because they weren't offered. And so, yes, I do believe that it's important for us to expand opportunity. I am an example of what happens when you give somebody a shot.
So you graduate from UCLA. I mean, it's not like graduating from LMU, but nonetheless, UCLA.
No, it's not.
And then you go to law school. I think that's when I first met you. I think it was the early 80s when we first met. And I remember meeting you, and you were working for the unions then, for UTLA, and we hung out for a while, and I remember, and we also did some campaigning where we went and worked for Roy Ball Allard's campaign and a couple of others. And he used to tell me the number one thing I would want to be would be on the school board and change education policy. And that's what education you would on the school board. And you ended up passing that up and going to the state legislature, the assembly, and the mayoralty. Why were you so focused on education?
Well, first of all, you're right. We did meet while I was in law school, but I was at the teachers union a few years later, and the reason why I've always been so focused on education, and why when Fernando mentioned, or Dr. Guerra mentioned that I have been here multiple times, he is a tour de force. You don't say no to him. He asks you again and again and again and again, and he's a big promoter of his university. And I think we're both as focused as we are on education, because it was an education that gave us a shot. And I tell people when I'm asked, how did you get here? How did you break that glass ceiling? Multiple times, frankly. I mean, the speakership, running in a civil rights created district where a Latino had never run before, beating an incumbent council member in the primary for the first and only time in LA history, the first and second runs for mayor. And I tell people, it's real simple. I can read and write. I got an opportunity, and I took advantage of that, and I've been able to do the things that I've done. And so I've always felt that there's no more important issue, public policy issue, or civil rights issue, frankly, democratic issue, economic issue, than the issue of giving people a quality education. And so you're right, back then, I never really thought about running for office, frankly, I think I was 40 when I ran for office. When I did think about it, I thought about the Board of Education, because I saw education as the most important issue.
We are at Loyola Marymount University having a conversation with Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa. You actually first kind of public office was not an elected one, but an appointed one. You were on the, what is now the MTA board, but was then the RTD board, and you were appointed by Gloria Molina, and it basically runs the entire bus system of Los Angeles, and later
And
on,
re-
of course, and LA County, right? And of course, later on as mayor, you served on that board. Talk to me about that first appointment and your introduction really to public policy as a decision maker.
Bus system and rail system,
Right.
you're right. Well, a lot of what I did, a lot of what I focused on, both in my 6 years in the State Assembly as Majority Whip, Majority Leader and Speaker, as a council member, and then as mayor, were issues that, frankly, had impacted me. So education, and the issue of transportation was important because my mother rode a bus for most of her life, a bus that was, fairly crowded, and wasn't the kind of bus service that I thought Angelenos deserved. So when I was honored with the opportunity to serve on the bus system, or on the RTD board back then, I wanted a high-quality, first-class bus system that would equal the train system that we were starting to build. And so many of the things that we did were now all clean fuel vehicles, where the next generation will be all zero-emission vehicles. Our buses and bus system among the best anywhere in the country. We made the bus system a priority in no small part because I felt like the people that ride the bus deserve to ride the bus in a way that honored them.
1994, you decided to run for the state legislature. Why? Why that time? What was going on? I know what happened was that there was a vacant seat, meaning that the incumbent was not running for that. And so there was that opportunity. You weren't the favorite of the establishment at that time, but
I've never been the favorite of the establishment, but you're right.
That sounds like the Republican debates, right? Nobody wants to be the favorite of the establishment, right? Now you are the
in my
establishment
case,
now.
well,
You're the establishment now.
Right. Well, one would argue that. I'm not in office, but one would argue that now. But I certainly, in every race I've ever been in, except for the 2009 race when I was an incumbent, I was always the insurgent candidate.
Yeah. So you go up to Sacramento, you're a freshman legislator, immediately get elected majority whip, and then within 2 years you become speaker, the second most powerful position in California politics, right after the governor. Tell the students what speaker is, what they do, and what power that position has.
Well, first of all, let me kind of go back for a second, speaking insurgent versus establishment. I basically challenged, a broken Sacramento back then, and said that, I thought we needed that healthcare ought to be universal. I campaigned
like Bernie Sanders.
Well, there's no question. I actually had a single-payer proposal in 1994 for kids. After they lost universal coverage in 1993, I proposed a single-payer, expansion, 200% expansion of Medi-Cal to 200% above poverty for kids.
So, and this is what Hillary's talking about in the campaign, when she says they called it Hillary Care. This is what she was proposing as First Lady, and that lost. And once you saw that battle, you said at least California has to take it up.
And take it on for kids.
Right.
That we ought to say in the richest state, in the richest country, in the history of the world, that healthcare ought to be a right, not a privilege, and that if we don't agree that it should be everyone, at a minimum, we ought to agree it should be kids. And couldn't get a vote out of the Assembly Committee or out of my house, and so a few years later,
House, he means the Assembly, not his personal house. I think they would have supported it.
Right. So a few years later, I did Healthy Families, an insurance program where 750,000 kids had health care. And so, like Hillary, I do believe that while you may have a goal, you can't be afraid to have a midterm goal as well. And very proud of the fact that 750,000 kids had health care. What does the speaker do? Herd cats is what is usually described as the main job of the speaker, because you have 80 members of the state assembly, all of whom think they could be speaker, and have their own agendas, their own priorities, and you have to get them to row in the same direction, to pass legislation, a budget. So herding cats is a big part of the job. And also describing, you know, a vision for the future. I spent a lot of time on that. I mean, during my speakership, passed the toughest assault weapons ban in the United States of America, all the tough gun laws that we passed that then became a template for the rest of the nation. You know, the year before, as majority leader, the largest expansion of healthcare since Medi-Cal, the largest school bond I was the author of, the largest parks bond in the U.S. on both counts. We spearheaded the largest water bond at the time. A lot of, you know, gay and lesbian civil rights, I was the author of the anti-discrimination bill, because at that time you could discriminate against gays and lesbians in employment and in housing. And I stood for that and gay marriage since I first ran in 1994. So I wasn't one of these guys that went like this. I was standing for these things, you know.
Well, you just described like the perfect liberal, right? Universal health care, gay rights, gun control, spending money on education, spending money on water.
Well, actually, I wouldn't call it, because you know, by the way.
Are you afraid of the liberal label?
No, actually not. What I'm afraid of is the lack of courage behind that label. And so what I've always said was I was a progressive. I was saying that long before this debate. If you look back in the 80s, in the 70s, I was describing, and we were describing ourselves as progressives. I had come out of the labor movement, I had come out of the civil rights movement, and I believed that the difference between me and some of the liberals is that they oftentimes just tinker around the edges. Now, having said that, once you're in the legislature and you have to work with the other side, and we're ultimately elected to get things done, you realize you have to compromise. Mm-hmm. But where were my values? My values were, you know, behind the notion that that we shouldn't discriminate. My values were around the notion that health care ought to be a right. My values were around the notion that we ought to invest in people and infrastructure. Values were around the notion that we ought to expand opportunity for more of us. So that's what I described back then as a progressive, and I'm actually kind of, it makes me smile when I hear so much talk about that, because you didn't hear it 20 years ago or 30 years ago, or when 40 years ago when I first started.
Yeah, so I mean, it was over 20 years ago that you were in the state legislature. You mentioned a lot of initiatives and efforts. Which one do you consider your most crowning achievement as an assembly member, as speaker?
You know, I actually can't answer that, because I can't tell you there was any one thing. But, you know, health care for 750,000
healthy
kids.
Families is
But it wasn't just that. When I did the school bond, it wasn't just the largest. What we used to do is do school bonds, and then you get to apply for the money. It's not based on need. It's based on who writes the best grants. And oftentimes, the more affluent districts, you know, the smaller districts would be able to write the best grants. And so big school districts like LA, poor school districts like LA and Oakland, you know, wouldn't get their fair share of the money. So I changed the formulas and said, hold it, it ought to be based on need too. Right. And my parks bond, why was it? It wasn't just the biggest in the history of the nation, it was also the first one that said parks ought to be where people are. Before, we would pass state bonds for parks, and they would build them all in the rural and suburban areas. And I said, hold it. You know, like, they ought to be in Watts. They ought to be in areas that don't have parks. So progressive, I was always looking to make sure that we're being fair across the board. And so that's why, you know, those kinds of things is what I was proud of. When I stood up on the floor of the legislature and said that, you know, thou shalt not discriminate, we shouldn't be able to say, because we're against, you know, gays because of their philosophy, the philosophy of of a group of people that they shouldn't have a right to a job or a house. Those things were basic for me. And so I think what I was proudest of during that time was that. And the last thing hey, look, we're in the middle of a campaign. And you heard today, liar, liar. You hear there's a lack of civility that I find offensive and a real threat to what democracy should all be about. I used to be the president of the ACLU, immediate past president before I got elected. That's why I wasn't the establishment candidate, as you said. And I'll tell you something.
The ACLU, the
American Civil Liberties Union. And I tell people,
which is
look,
considered a very left-wing progressive organization.
I don't know if it's left-wing, but it's certainly
it's left-wing.
Well, how about this? It stands for the Constitution.
Yeah.
That's not left-wing. That's as as American as apple pie. But some people don't. They only want to stand for some parts of the
right. That's correct.
The Constitution. And not all the parts. So, but look, despite the fact that I had these views that you label as left-wing or very progressive, I also respected the other side. I understood that they got elected too. I understood that, our job is to work together. And, I don't buy this idea that we should be screaming at each other all the time. The fact of the matter is this, the country's evenly divided. When I was speaker, the state was fairly divided. It's now more blue. But back then it wasn't, and I really.
You got elected in '94, and the Republicans actually had the majority in the assembly, and you were part of the class that recaptured the assembly for the Democrats.
That's exactly right, and so I believe that people elect you to get things done, and they elect you to work together. It doesn't mean you agree with them. It doesn't mean you don't fight from time to time, but we can't just fight. You're seeing a lack of civility, a polarization in our politics that's just not healthy. Yeah. You see it even on college campuses, frankly, where people can't debate and have different views and different opinions.
And that's just the faculty.
Well, that's just the faculty, right? Yeah, and that's not healthy. I really do believe, because I was president of the ACIU, I do believe in speech and vigorous debate, and we ought to be able to challenge one another, and we don't have to agree on everything. I tell people, you and I are very close friends. We don't agree on everything, and yet we're still close friends. And why should you expect that people in your own party or people in the other party are going to agree with you on everything?
So you're in the state legislature from '94 to 2000 for 6 years because of term limits, and then you are, for the last 4 years, Speaker or the head of the Assembly. You leave in 2000, right?
Last 2 years.
Last 2 years, right? And you leave in 2000, and then you immediately run for mayor in 2001. Okay.
But just so you understand how quixotic that was. Even though I was Speaker of the Assembly, nobody knew who I was.
So nobody can even pronounce your name or spell it.
Well, nobody could pronounce my name. I could barely pronounce my name because we made it up.
Well, tell the students.
My ex-wife's name was Villaraigosa.
I first met him. He was Tony Villar.
Villar. My name was Villar. Her name was Villaraigosa. We took one R out and made one long 13-letter name that nobody could pronounce or spell. In fact, some people still can't pronounce it. I was at 9% name ID. The other guy was at 72. I was
okay. Well, you got it. The other guy was.
Well, he became mayor, but.
Well, no, but the other guy was Jimmy Hahn, who was the city attorney at that time.
For 16 years and controller for 4.
And more important than that, his
father had been in office since the 40s, and his uncle had been in office since the 30s, and between the three of them, they had never lost an election.
Right, and his sister is currently a member of Congress.
Right, and a good friend of mine, by the way. And so.
Not in 2001, though.
No, not in 2001. So 72 to 9, 3, they'd vote for me, and 45, they'd vote for him. So when I first ran, almost everybody said, "Are you nuts? Like, this isn't going to happen." And, a year later, I won the primary and then lost the runoff, and but
Well, remember, we always have a primary, and that's in March, and you got like 20, in the high 20s or 30.
29, he
20.
got 24, 25.
Right, right.
Something.
So he came in second, but there were a couple of other candidates. And then so you have a runoff between the top two vote getters, and that was you and Jim Hahn, and then he ended up winning. How did that feel?
It's funny. I tell people the 2001 race, and people don't understand that, was my best race. I had the most fun.
Until election night.
Until election night. I had the most fun. I've never been associated with anything so
Felt like a movement.
electric, without question. 6,000 people on election night. I think he had 800 or 1,000 or so. And, that night I said, look, people have voted and they've said James Hahn is the best man. And I've always had respect for Jim, because Jim comes from a long line of public servants and served the city greatly. And I respected the fact that they just didn't know me well enough to take a chance. But that was the best race. That was fun.
Yeah, I mean, I actually distinctly remember what you just said. On election night, I was asked to go to the headquarters for Jimmy Hahn, because I was going to be on television to do some analysis, given the exit polls and all the work that I have my students do and then take credit for. And so I was there, and you're right, there were about 600-700 people. And then afterwards, they asked if I would go over to your place, and there were like 6,000. And the contrast was so stark. It was as though you had won, and he had lost. It was, the party was like over right away over there, and yours lasted until the wee hours.
Our parties always last till the wee hours. I got in trouble for that, but it's all right.
Hey, James Hahn did a good job as mayor, yet you ran against him again.
Look.
Did he do a good job?
Well, first of all, let me answer the first part. Let me say something about him. I've always said we both had a dream, and we both had a right to pursue that dream. In my case, most people thought it was an impossible dream. In his case, they pretty much thought he was going to be able to realize that dream. And I think he did a good job. He was a decent man.
He is a decent man. He's a
I'm
judge.
sorry, not was a decent man. I'm speaking in the past because of the election, but he's a decent man, and comes from a long line of public servants. As I said, I'm very close to his sister, and a lot of respect for him.
Yeah. So Jimmy Hahn is mayor from 2001 to 2005. Very early on in his tenure, the Valley talks about seceding, and they actually have a vote, and he comes out dead set against it, as you were. But
And I joined him, by the way, after losing the race. I went with him, and I went with labor, and I went up and down throughout the whole city and said that breaking up this city would be a disaster, and it was just the wrong thing to do. And a lot of people couldn't understand why I would stand next to him, but I think what we had in common is we both love the city.
Yeah. And then, in addition, he did not reappoint the incumbent police chief at that time, Bernard Parks. And that's one of the most powerful positions that the mayor has, to appoint the police chief, because police, community relations, and just policing in urban America, as you can all tell by things that have been happening, are incredibly important. And James Hahn refused to reappoint that police chief, and he paid for it. And basically, two decisions that I think were right. I think we should have been against Valley secession, and therefore the Valley voters took it out on him and kind of switched, and some of them began supporting you, even though you were against it. And then because he fired the police chief, who was African American, a lot of African American voters said, well, we can't trust you anymore. And you lost the African American vote overwhelmingly in 2001, and you won the majority in 2005. So 2005.
Well, actually,
how was the election?
I won the kids. I won the kids in 2001.
That sounds like Bernie Sanders.
Well, I did. I won the kids. I lost their parents and their grandparents.
Yeah.
In 2005, I won their parents.
But in any election, I'd rather have the grandparents
Rather
and the parents.
say, let me finish. In 2005, I won the parents, but I still lost the grandparents.
Of course.
Today, I have a lot of support in that community, and in no small part because I spent most of my time as mayor in South LA and in Watts, because it was the part of the city that needed me the most.
Yeah.
And so I'm very fortunate for that. But I will say something. You're right. Those were two big factors. There were others. But and let's recall, I won the primary, lost the runoff, in no small part because there was a campaign around the notion that you couldn't trust me, and I think after that race, and the way I handled the defeat. By the way, I always say, when you lose, you should lose big, which means you should be humble. When you win, you should win small, which you should be humble. And in both cases, I lost, I acknowledged him as the winner, went to work with him, became a city council member, and then when I ran against him, it wasn't personal, as I said, we both had a dream.
Yeah.
And my dream was to be the mayor of the city that my grandpa came to 100 years ago, and to speak for a part of the city that had been left behind. Because let's be clear, this is a great city, but it's a city that, it's almost a tale of two cities. And I wanted to speak out for, a part of the city that just was neglected and underinvested in. And so I think that, frankly, is a big reason why we won too the second time around, because the second time around, there wasn't a fear around my candidacy, or at least they were more comfortable, and I was able to generate a lot more support in a broader community.
So is there something different that you would have done in 2001 to win that election? Could you have done something different?
I probably was a little too hot. I mean, you said it, there was a movement, and that's great, but it,
So it was a backlash a little
it was
bit.
a backlash.
Yeah.
It was a backlash in the more conservative parts of the city. There was a backlash to it. What's this guy going to do?
Yeah.
Looking back, I had a lot more fun in that race because I ran with abandon. In the second race, it's a little more careful, probably a little more measured, just because I saw that electric is nice on election night, but if you didn't win that night, not so nice, right?
Yeah. But so before you ran, though, for mayor again, you ran for city council. Why'd you run for city council? I mean, you ran for mayor, and all of a sudden you're a city council member.
Well, I ran for city council, frankly. I hadn't been thinking about it. I was working in the private sector and wasn't really thinking about it. I was thinking about running for mayor 8 years down the line, but started to realize that out of sight, out of mind, and didn't make sense, that I needed to get back in the thick of things. And if you recall, they redistricted my house in the first councilmanic district, and the scuttlebutt was they did it so that I couldn't run for the city council. And so started thinking, when that happened, there was a lot of discussion around that, and started thinking about city council and serving, and I said, this might be a great opportunity. And so I ended up moving so that I could run in that district, and did, and had a lot of fun for 2 years.
As you mentioned earlier, you took on an incumbent city council member and actually beat him in the primary. First time that had been done for...
First and only time.
Yeah, first and only time. So it shows how difficult it is. But okay, so 2005, you run again against the same guy, but now he's actually mayor, and you actually beat him. You beat him easily. You're now mayor of Los Angeles. What's on your agenda when you start off first?
I didn't beat him easily. It was a hard won fight, but I did win by a large margin, yes.
Okay, that's what I meant. He won by a large margin. I would say beat him easily, but okay. And so you're mayor of LA now. It's like, this impossible dream, this kid who used to, deliver newspapers, shine shoes by City Hall, all of a sudden you're mayor of Los Angeles. Only the second Latino to be mayor of LA. The last one was at like 1873. And, I looked this up. That mayor won by 5 votes. Okay, it was like 435 to 430. That's how few people or voters there were. That was the vote. Okay, I mean that's not even your
Well,
elementary school
let's
vote.
be clear. Only 32% of the electorate participated in 2009. In 2005, it was 36%. So nothing to brag home to mom about.
Right.
People don't vote in large numbers in this town.
Or any town.
Any town, but here's
but that's actually for a large city. That's about average. We're actually a little bit above average.
really.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Think about
it's
this.
pathetic, and it's
Yeah, it's pathetic. You got it. It's
in
naturally
any
pathetic,
case,
right?
because 36% of the vote, or 32 in my case, is I guess the last election was
23%.
23%.
What can be done about that?
Well, I thought you had some great ideas.
Yes,
I mean,
thank you.
really. Look, the schedule.
Yeah.
This is not healthy. We can't always complain about politics and politicians and then not vote and wonder why things are the way they are. I mean, it's absolutely pathetic. A big part is the amount of poverty we have in this town. Big part of why people aren't voting in big numbers is the lack of education and the age. A lot of young people, disproportionately, more than San Francisco as an example, in big numbers on all three counts. So we're not voting in the numbers. You know, we need to do a number of things. I think I've always believed that if you don't want people to raise the kind of money which turns people off that they do to run for office, then you ought to be able to go on the airwaves. If you're a legitimate candidate who's got support, you ought to be able to go on the airwaves. And, you know, it's so cost prohibitive to do that.
Yeah, especially in LA.
And you ought to be able to go in the mail.
Yep.
I mean, look, it is not healthy for us to not vote in the numbers that we do. And it's just not. And it's why both parties focus a lot more on older voters than they do younger ones. We ought to have universal preschool. I mean, look, we ought to invest in every kid to make sure
they don't vote, man. Why should we
that's
do anything
exactly
for those
right.
kids? They don't even
That's
come
exactly
out to vote,
right. You know, we ought to
Obviously, they're not even eligible
all
to vote.
agree that kids ought to have a right to health care. I mean, you know, one could argue, I wouldn't agree with it, but one could argue that their adults shouldn't, but that's not an argument I agree with. But minimum kids, but they don't vote. So you see that time, education. Yeah. When I was going to school, public schools, because I went to Catholic school and public school, depending on how much money my mother had, and depending on whether I got kicked out or not. And, you know, we were at top 5 in per pupil spending. We had the best public schools in the country.
Right.
Among them, you know, we're now 36, and only because of that tax increase, Prop 30, we were 40-something for the longest time. We've got to invest in our young people, and we're not doing it.
So
College affordability is another issue.
yeah. At Loyola Marymount University with Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa, talking to him about his political career. We're going to get into a little bit more about what he did as mayor and then what he's doing right now and future plans. So you got elected mayor in 2005, and you assumed the office on July 1st, get to move into the mayor's mansion, Getty House. What's on your agenda? What's the first thing?
Well, they made a lot of fun of the fact that I had a broad agenda and a deep agenda. I don't think you get elected to be mayor of a great global city, a big state, or a country like the United States of America and not have a broad agenda. So I said, dream with me. We're going to make LA the cleanest, greenest big city in the country. I said, we're going to do something to improve our, dramatically improve our schools. That we're going to build a subway to the sea and build public transit. That we're going to stand up for the notion that we need to be more inclusive and that we need to be a safer city. So let's go through that. Start with cleaner, greener, big city.
Well, let me remind the students, especially those that are in that local politics class, this is the mayor of Los Angeles. And let's compare him to the mayor of New York. In New York, the mayor appoints all the members of the Board of Education and controls the budget. In LA?
No.
No. In New York, the mayor controls the transit system, controls their budget. In LA?
No.
No, and I can go on, and he has
Well,
complete control.
and in New York, they're a city and county both.
Right. And
So
controls
all the
of health.
human services, health services, all of the human services are controlled by the mayor.
Okay, so now, the mayor of Los Angeles has no control over health policies at the local level, social services at the local level, education at the local level, and transit at the local level. Some in transit, but I mean, it's quasi, right?
Yeah.
And
You have
so,
a voice, you don't have control.
yeah, and so basically, what power do you have?
Well, the power of the bully pulpit. And that's why I'll say to you, for those of you who are thinking about one day public service or leading in some capacity, don't be afraid to be a risk taker and be bold. I was bold. I wasn't afraid to be bold. I got beat up for it. You know, they love to focus on, didn't do 1 million trees, only did 400,000. In the middle of a recession, true. And
So
wait,
wait, he promised that he would plant
1 million trees. So did New York, so did Denver, so did Houston, and then the Great Recession came. We did 400,000, 6 times more than we used to. U.S. Forestry called it the best urban forestry program in the country, and the state of California called it the best one in the state. So let's start with making LA the cleanest, greenest big city in the country. You all don't remember, but your parents and grandparents do. When we were kids, how many of you are native to LA? Okay, some of you, a good small portion. So when we were kids, you couldn't go outside on the playground because of the smog.
Remember snow days in the east?
Not
we
one
had,
day.
We had smog days. You couldn't-
Not
seriously.
one day, not 2 days, multiple days. You couldn't go out. I ran track, played a little football. You couldn't go out and practice back then. That's the kind of smog we had. We went from
So,
3.
and now we have very few,
Well, wait,
if any.
but we're still dirty air in comparison to other cities, but we've made an improvement. So
Let me just, every once in a while, we have a bad smog day. And actually, it reminds me of my youth when I was running out there. And so it brings on incredible, great memories to me. And so I know it's a weird thing, but I actually don't mind smoggy days every once in a while because it reminds me of the playground, running around, being young, not caring, not having to grade papers, not having to do any of that. So there's a little bit of that.
Nostalgia.
Nostalgia. It brings all that. You know how some type of...
we'll send you to Beijing
Right, yeah.
so you could have a lot of nostalgia.
There's a sense of smell
So-
or something that brings something up. Incredible public policy victory cleaning the air.
Oh, it was. And let me tell you what we did. We own the largest public utility in the United States, so the water and power. We went from 3% renewables to 20% by 2010, as we promised. We signed on to Kyoto, which is the agreement before Copenhagen, which was the one before Paris, around climate change. And we said if the United States won't sign on to Kyoto, we will.
As a city.
As a city, now more than 1,000 cities have signed on. Kyoto said you would reduce carbon emissions by 7% of 1990 levels by 2012. By 2012, we hit 28%. We were the #1 American city, #5 in the world, behind London and Copenhagen at 40, Berlin at 36, Toronto at 34. We have the largest port in the United States of America and the dirtiest port in the United States. It is now the cleanest port in the United States of America, almost all electric port. We reduced truck emissions there by 90%. Every street lamp that you see in the city of Los Angeles went from incandescent lights to LED. Every traffic light is synchronized and all LED. We did plant our 400,000 trees. We have some of the toughest green building standards in the nation. We pushed it.
So by all measures, all metrics, it's a very successful program. What do critics of this effort say?
We still have dirty air and that we should have done it all in 8 years.
Oh, so it's more critics from the left, nobody from the right.
Nah, it's critics.
Yeah.
The Monday morning quarterbacks, the people don't realize what you just said. We didn't run everything, but we had to You know,
So
we had
you-
to do it, use the bully pulpit. But let me get to the next three, because we talked about what I did. When I became mayor, we had, it was one of the most violent cities in America. Look back, if you guys were kids, but those of you, we had high homicide rate, high violent crime rate, 45% drop in violent crime, 45% drop in homicides, along with New York, the two safest big cities in the country. And we put civil rights leaders and police reformers on our police commission and focused our police department on community and constitutional policing. We had the most innovative prevention and intervention programs in the country, adopted by USAID, now using in Central America. 3, education. We went from a 44% graduation rate. That's what LA had. When I became mayor, a 44% graduation rate. So more than, 50% of the people were failing. And, more people were failing than were graduating, rather. We now have a 72% graduation rate. I took on over 17 schools, 16,000 kids. They were the toughest in the city. We had a 36% when we started, now 77% graduation rate. Roosevelt Magnet, one of the schools we took over, 100% graduation rate. Mendez, 86%, all on the east side. We have the Jordan High School in Watts. We made strides. And then the last area, transportation.
But let me hold on for you. Again, I have to emphasize, he's talking about all these educational achievements. Remember what we said. The mayor has no formal responsibility for education. Okay, that means he could not dictate or even propose solutions that in a formal sense. So how did you do this?
Bully pulpit. The absolute bully pulpit. I wasn't afraid to stand up and say, this city will not succeed if we're just rich and poor. This city will not succeed if the majority of kids that go to school in this city are failing. If they can't come to LMU, SC, UCLA, Occidental, Cal State, and the rest of them. I said it's unacceptable and we won't stand for it. And, I just pounded away.
Yeah.
And I pushed that school board and put people in the superintendency that understood that we had to have the urgency of now to fight for kids that weren't making it on a scale that is threatening to our economy and our democracy and our social cohesion.
So you're not gonna, well, you probably do remember this, but you become mayor, you're saying you're gonna do this. I'm talking to you and I say, don't do that. Do not do that. You're gonna, and not because I don't believe it, but I believe you were going to waste all your political capital, not get it done, be deflected by other things that you had control. And the major reason I'm telling him, don't do that, you're wasting your time, is he has no formal control. He's got to convince everybody to go along. And the time and effort that it was going to take, I was afraid it was going to drain from all the other things that you could be focused on. And I was 180 degrees wrong. I'm glad you didn't listen to me.
No, you actually were 180 degrees right and wrong. And I'll tell you why. Because when you read about the failed Villaraigosa administration, I tried to take over the school district. I went to the state and said, give the mayor the responsibility of the schools. They gave me a partnership to run the schools. The school district sued, I lost at trial, and then I lost on appeal. So the narrative is that because I lost taking over the school district. Formally taking over, that we lost. But I just told you, we went from 44% graduation rate to 72, and we need to be at 100. So you're absolutely right. I had no power, but I did have a bully pulpit, and I wasn't afraid to use it. The last point, transportation and infrastructure. When I said we'd build a subway to the sea, you should see during the inauguration, people just laughed. Like, yeah, really, that's not going to happen. And so we went to work. And of course it's not going to, and almost from the beginning, people said, oh, yeah, right. Where's your subway to the sea? As if anybody could just, look at a magic ball and say, I want or a wand and say, you know, I'm going to build the subway to the sea. So what we did was we put a transportation plan, half-penny sales tax, generating $40 billion over 30 years, got it passed in a recession with 2/3 vote. So 66.7% of the people voted for it, got it passed. You know this exposition line that's just down the way? We built 1 busway, 3 light rail lines, are in construction and 2 more. The exposition line will finish to Santa Monica. All of that got built. We did more in those 8 years virtually than the entire history of the city before that. So look, at the end of the day, do you do everything you say you want to do? Of course not. We didn't do 1,000,000 trees. But we were bold, and we took on big challenges. And, you know, you didn't ask me, but I'm going to say, what was I proudest of?
That's
It was
my next question.
none of
Let
that.
me ask you, what were you proudest of?
It was none of that. You know what I was proudest of? When I became mayor, you mentioned it. I never did, by the way. When I became mayor, there was a lot of talk about what does it mean to elect the first Latino mayor? And I said, well, why are you asking that question? I was born here. My mother was born here. My grandpa got here 100 years ago. You know, I'm an American of Mexican descent and proud of it. But I want to be a mayor of all the people, not just some of the people. 12 years later, I leave office, 2013. I tell people I left with a 58% approval rating. So half the people liked me and half the people didn't. You know, after 8 years as mayor, they get tired of you. They just get tired of hearing your voice, tired of your mouth, tired of whatever.
That happens to my students in like 20 minutes.
Yeah, that's
So,
right.
yeah.
I'll bet. And I tell people, you know, what I'm proudest of, nobody called me the Latino mayor anymore. I was everybody's mayor. I was a mayor for all the people. And people were comfortable. And proud because the next guy, the current mayor, Eric Garcetti, ran in no small part sharing his heritage as an American of Mexican descent. And I said, boy, times have changed because when I ran, you know, that was...
Well, what's amazing is just the narrative about that. Bernie Sanders, if elected, would be the first Jewish American president. Nobody really even talks about it. He's actually the first Jewish American candidate to win any primary in the history of American politics in New Hampshire. Nobody talks about it. That's pretty awesome. Romney went 4 years ago. The
First Mormon.
Mormon. And it was a very...
Times have changed.
Yeah, the idea 40, 50 years ago that you would have nominated a Mormon as the Republican nominee would have been so far-fetched.
Well, now, what, 14 years ago, nominating me.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
Yeah.
You know, there was all the discussion. I was always described as the Latino candidate for mayor. And I took that all the way to the publisher of the LA Times, and I said, why are you describing me that way? He said, well, why are you so edgy about it? I said, well, you're saying to 70, because at the time, Latinos were only 22% of the electorate. You're saying to 78% of the electorate that I'm somehow different. Why don't you just say, I'm a candidate like everybody else.
Or describe everybody else as the white candidate.
The white candidate,
or
the gay candidate, the female candidate. That, I actually said all of that, and because it was Jewish candidate too. Said, describe all of us with that adjective. Otherwise, stop describing me that way. Just give me a shot.
Well, especially, there's been no Jewish mayor in the history of LA, so it could have been, you know, that would have been groundbreaking as well. So Eric...
There hadn't been a woman mayor.
Yeah, Eric Garcetti is half Latino, half Jewish, so he's like, he trumped you, man. It's like...
He's double.
He's double.
He's a double entendre.
Yeah, yeah. How's he doing?
You know, it's tough being mayor, and I think he's done a good job.
If you say so yourself, right?
Well, you just mentioned it, the lack of real power over so many things. And
what advice would you give to him right now?
You know, I'd give it privately.
Okay. We won't tell anybody. Go ahead.
And I do. You know, I tell him, look, I'm for you. And I'm for you because I know what a tough job you got and because I love this town. So
you want him to be successful.
I want him to be successful. Of course you want him to be successful. And you want him to build on the things that we did. I mean, when you look at downtown in large part happened during the 8 years I was mayor. I mean, and the buildings you see got entitled for the most part during that time. And, you know, the fact that they're going to be building even more is a great thing. And the same with Hollywood and other places. And from my vantage point, this city means a lot to me. It's why I wanted to run for mayor, and I think it's good that we have a mayor who grew up here, was born here, just like Jim before him, and
That's 3 mayors in a row now that have been born in Los Angeles, whereas the previous 7 mayors had not been born in LA.
That's right.
It's
And I
pretty
think
amazing.
there was something different about us.
Yeah.
You know, we're native.
Right.
You know, now it's not surprising to have people who are native to LA or California. But back when I grew up, almost everybody was from somewhere else. And which I made when I ran in 2001, I would be at town halls where people would raise their hand. And you're probably going to blow your mind because just alien to you, but where people would raise their hand and say, why should I vote for you? You're not even an American. And I'd take the mic and get up, walk right into them, put a smile on my face. What a great country we live in. Here I am, Grandpa came here 100 years ago, came with a dream, came with a shirt on his back, worked in the fields, built a small business into a thriving middle-class business, lost all his money in the Depression, lost his wife, and put his 2 kids in a foster home. And here I am, because of his sacrifice, on the threshold of being your mayor. So from my vantage point, when you were born here and your grandpa came here with a dream, yeah, you love this town.
Yeah.
Yeah, it means a lot to you. It still means a lot to me. Every time I fly over this town, I feel like...
If a Canadian can be president of the United States, why can't a Mexican be mayor of LA? Is another way of looking at it. We are at Loyola Marymount University talking to Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa. You left office in 2013. It is now 2016. What have you been doing?
I'm a professor of practice at USC, and I lecture there in various departments, and I also have a center called California Central, or an initiative rather, called California Central, where we're looking at some of the challenges facing the state and looking to what we need to do to restore the luster to the California dream. I'm at the Bipartisan Policy Center. I said, you know, I chaired the Democratic Party convention in 2012 in Raleigh, North Carolina, but I tell people I want to work with the other side. I'm tired of, you know, watching all the screaming. So we're working on infrastructure. In fact, we came from an infrastructure meeting at the airport and at USC earlier today. I'm working in the private sector and, you know, enjoying my kids. I have 4 kids, 22, 26, 37, and 40, and just enjoying my family.
Okay, here we go. Let's hear a question from one of the students.
Hello, my name is Brianna Medina, and I'm a junior political science major, and I'm also a student research assistant at the Center for the Study of Los Angeles. My question for you today, Mayor Villaraigosa, is what was your biggest regret, and what was your most triumphant accomplishment during your mayoral tenure? Thank you.
Well, we talked about the triumphs, you know, the environment, public safety, education, transportation.
No, what I was proudest of, though, weren't any of those achievements. It was what I said. I think I helped to make this city comfortable with its diversity.
Right.
I'm proudest of that. I'm not the only catalyst for that, but I certainly was a big part of that. And that's what I'm proudest of, not the other achievements. But with respect to the second part of the question,
The regret?
you know, look,
I mean, even Frank Sinatra had.
I think I said it here before, and I'll say it again. I had a failed marriage and a very public divorce that wasn't proud of, and certainly hurt my family, my kids, and I let a lot of people down. And so I'd say that that is probably well, not probably, it is a regret. You know, there are others. Look, particularly in education, I didn't have a bully pulpit. I had a newspaper of record that has just a short-term memory, and wanted to see progress almost immediately. I told you they wanted the subway to the sea within days of my getting elected. They wanted to see the graduation rates move up, even though I didn't have direct control. So I got into some fights that, looking back, I didn't, want to get into, particularly, I think in education with the teachers union. I'd come out of the union. I certainly respect teachers. My wife of 20 years was a teacher, and have a lot of respect for them. But I just felt strongly I had to fight for these kids, and I couldn't wait for the process, if you will. And looking back, probably should have spent a little more time trying to build that a broader coalition. But when you're in office like that,
I'm not sure I agree with you. I think the way you did it forced it so much so that it took it, in terms of education policy in LA, that you'd still would be dealing with it. And I don't think you would have, we would have made as much progress had you not taken the frontal attack right away. I'm going to take it over. So I would say that. So.
Well, you study Los Angeles,
yeah,
so we'll take you.
So I'm kind of surprised you talk about your personal life in such a public manner. Do you think it's fair that we now expect so many, like, we ask everything about the personal lives of people?
I won't comment if I think it's fair. I'm not sure how relevant that focus is. I mean, look, people are homeless today in numbers that we've never seen. There are people going hungry and living in poverty in LA. People that stuck in traffic, people who want better schools. I think that is the most relevant to us. But we're living in a world today, and the pendulum swings from one way to another, and where the lives of our elected leaders are examined in a way that they hadn't in the past. And I say that I regret that because I not only hurt my family, I let people down, and there's no question that it slowed me down for a bit. Mm-hmm. It didn't slow me down forever. I kept on, almost immediately, kept on moving ahead, but the attention was focused on that and not on the work. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of the kind of thing that, you just, I regret it, again, is because, for the reasons I've said, but also because it slowed the focus we needed to really push an agenda.
We have a student to ask another question. Introduce yourself.
Hello, Mayor Villaraigosa. My name is Alex Torres. I'm a senior communications major here at LMU.
And who's your favorite professor?
Professor Fernando Guerra.
Oh,
Yeah.
What a shocker.
Shocker, right? So my question is in regards to your initiatives here in Los Angeles on green energy. Governor Brown has made environment conservation a huge priority during his time as governor lately, especially given the drought. What are some of your thoughts on Governor Brown's initiatives, as well as something the next governor of California can do to help improve?
Well, I think Governor Brown's made a lot of strides, no question. But look, I used to be Speaker of the Assembly, so I also acknowledge the legislature, Kevin De Leon, the President pro tem, and Tony Atkins, the Speaker, have done a lot around climate change. Fabian Nunez before him, Karen Bass, my cousin, first cousin, by the way, John Pettis, the Speaker, former Speaker. All of them did a lot to build on where we are today. When I was Speaker, actually when I was Majority Leader, I did the largest expansion to promote our clean air since the Clean Air Act with the Carl Moyer Act. So, we've built on it. What do we need to continue to do? I think the goal of SB 32 is a goal that
it's a bill on climate change.
On climate change, and I think we need to commit ourselves to a 50% reduction in carbon emissions, renewables, as they're saying. We need to do the part of SB 32 which didn't get passed with respect to emissions, and look, climate change is one of the biggest threats around the world, And we have to make it a win-win. I think the next governor also needs to do what we did here in LA, and that is not just set these high standards, but help to create an industry that will create jobs so that we can't get victimized and slowed down by the jobs blackmail arguments. Because the arguments that they make, if you go to renewables, if you clean up the air, you'll hurt the fossil fuel industry, and you'll hurt jobs. And so we've got to create technologies that we can export around the world. So the next governor needs to be thinking along those lines and creating win-wins and building coalitions and focusing on our cities. I mean, as much as Governor Brown, Schwarzenegger before him have done around clean air, and the legislatures that worked with them, I mean, frankly, I just shared with you what LA was doing. Every big city needs to do the kind of thing we were doing. So they were setting standards, but we were actually meeting them. So we were doing a little more than just kind of legislation. We were actually doing it. We went from 3% to 20%. What I didn't mention, we signed agreements here in LA while I was mayor with the Sierra Club and Al Gore, who did An Inconvenient Truth, the movie about climate change. We'll be completely off of coal, our public utility, by the year 2025. The only American city, large city, probably anywhere in the world, but certainly one of the few, completely off of coal by 2025. I signed those agreements. So we can do this, and I think the next governor's really got to focus on that. By the way, long before there was a drought, I went to 2 days watering a week. Your parents were not happy with me, particularly if you had a pool or large lawns. We reduced our water use by 20%. It was a very unpopular thing, but I knew this was coming because all the climatologists told us this was coming. One, that climate change was here, and two, that the drought was coming. Yeah. So we knew this back then.
So we talked about then, who should be the next governor? Okay, let me just, let's not play around. Are you going to run for governor?
Well, look, you know, when I left mayor.
It seems like a yes or no answer, right?
Yeah, well, it is for you.
It's easy for me. I'm not running for governor.
Right. When I left mayor, it was funny because they were asking, what am I going to do? And the joke at the time, mayor, no job, no house, no car. So they made a lot of fun about the fact that I wasn't going to have a car because I had, you know, security at that time, and I didn't have a car. And I wasn't going to be at Getty House anymore, the mayor's residence, so I wasn't going to have a house. And I didn't have any jobs because I thought my job was to finish my job until the last day, right? So
basically homeless.
Then, yeah, homeless. And so the rap was, so what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm riding into the sunset. And then I smiled, but I will be back.
Question.
Hello, Chris Liss, senior political science major. I just had a quick question, and that was, as someone who is an advocate of expanding opportunities for children, would you say that you're personally disappointed in the lack of school choice options such as vouchers, education savings accounts in California?
I don't support vouchers because the voucher's never been big enough to pay for a private education, but I do support choice. So while I was mayor, our school district tripled the number of charters, quintupled the number of charters at 800 and above, which when we had an academic performance index before it was eliminated, was a successful school. So I supported the parent trigger, which gave parents the right to close down a failing school and bring in a new operator, whether it was a traditional public school or a pilot school, a partnership school like mine, a turnaround effort, or a charter school. So I do believe in providing those kinds of choices, but I don't support vouchers. So that's an area where there's a disagreement. But
so you worked for the United Teachers of Los Angeles, the union, very strong, and now you're not one of their favorites anymore because you've been so supportive of charter schools and of other efforts to reform. So it kind of, you know, what would the Antonio Villaraigosa UTLA organizers say of the Antonio Villaraigosa today, if those two were having a conversation?
I think there'd probably be a lot of agreement. I've always been for teachers, and I've always been for our public schools. I tell people it was a Catholic school that gave me a foundation, but I got kicked out. It was a public school that gave me a second chance. I was married to a teacher. I worked for them. I believe that teachers have a noble profession and that they should be supported. But I also was a poor kid growing up in this town. And I believe that they have a right to a high-quality education. And I have, so I think the Antonio Villaraigosa who worked for UTLA would say to the Antonio Villaraigosa who was mayor that I understand what you're doing. I want to support our teachers and their unions, but I also am going to always fight for those kids because they can't fight for themselves.
But that young Antonio would still pick at you.
He probably would pick at me a little bit, but I think he would, when given the opportunity to talk, not just be screamed at, when given the opportunity to talk, I think the Antonio Villaraigosa of old would say, I understand what you're doing. You're fighting for these kids who don't have a voice, who can't fight for themselves. You're fighting for their parents, who have a right to send their kids to a school that is essentially what the American dream has always been about.
Next question.
Hi, my name is Mia, and I'm a senior political science major, and I am also a student research assistant at the Center for the Study of Los Angeles. The question that I have for you is, just because we're talking about education, what is your opinion of the local control funding formula?
I mean, this is
You're
a
talking about the one that Brown passed?
Yeah.
Yeah. I supported it. I'd like to go even further. I'd like to build on that. It basically stands for the proposition, look, my son's in, let's say he's in a public school, and he was for a while.
I thought he went to Loyola High.
He did, but in grammar school he was at Mount Washington Elementary. So, and before that in South Pass. So, that local funding formula basically stands for the proposition that the kids that need the most help ought to have more resources. So, you know, in a world, just being even across the board isn't being even when these kids are coming in with much fewer, much lower vocabulary, oftentimes no preschool, you know, a year or two behind. Giving them the kinds of resources that will help them catch up isn't a radical notion. And the governor stood for that. And I'm proud that he did. I think we need to build on that. That's why we need universal preschool. That's why we need to provide a safety net for these kids early on. And you know, come on. We can't just give up on all these kids. We got to invest in them. So yes, I do, as a general proposition, support it. I think we should have done a little more.
Next question.
Hello, my name is Gabrielle Wilson. I'm a senior political science major, and my question to you is, we currently have the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator as well as other programs that are currently being launched this year. What other programs do you think that we could also look forward to in terms of social entrepreneurship as well as clean entrepreneurship as well?
That's great. Boy, you got a lot of information. You know, well, the Clean Tech Incubator and the Port Innovation Fund were all about responding to the private sector, which was opposed to a lot of the clean air, clean tech initiatives. And so what we said was, let's create an innovation center, a tech incubator, where we're looking at innovation and trying to develop technologies that will create capital investment in this town and more jobs. So what else should we be doing? Well, we should build on what we did, and we need to do it statewide. I brought UCLA, SC, and Caltech together around a clean tech initiative. We should be broadening that to places like LMU and other universities, the CSU system. We need to be marrying technology to our climate change efforts, just like we should around water. You know, We need to, this is the home of innovation, this state. And leveraging our assets, the great universities that we have, to develop technologies is one way to do it.
So, one last question. Will you come back to LMU and visit us when you're governor?
He's good. I will come back.
All right. All right. Hey, let's give Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa a hand.
Thank you.